Hello, welcome back to my channel, Callie's Kingdom. Of course, it is raining again while I'm trying to film this, but again, hopefully you can't hear it. It's like every video I do where I'm talking about writing and writing books and not just reading, it's like it has to rain. But anyway, if you hadn't seen last video, I talked about how I'm an author and I actually published 3 books before, which is so crazy. But this video, I'm going to tell you all about my current book that I'm writing, and hopefully, fingers crossed, will be the next one that I publish. And at the end of the video, I'm going to read the first chapter from my current project, and then the first chapter of this project. I don't know in what order, but then I can see just how much I evolved and got better at writing. And then also this will give you a sneak peek of this book in case you want to read it. So yeah, let's get into it. So, the book that I'm writing right now, I've nicknamed Project Crystal. So that's not the actual name that the book will be called, because a lot of authors, when they're writing books and they don't know the title, they just call it Project, like blank, and then insert something that has to do with the story here. So crystals are a big part of my story. So I've been calling it Project Crystal. Although, when I was brainstorming some possible title ideas, I really started to like the title Crystallize, because it just sounds really cool. I like the one-word titles. I was trying to think about something like that, because I really like Caraval, or something like this, or this book that I wrote was Elements. And I also like books that are more like The Crown of Darkness, where it's the blank of blank, or something that has to do with the story and everything, but there wasn't a specific object that had to do with the story, so I was more trying to figure out a good one-word title, and I think Crystallize is really cool. So, and it also kind of sounds like Crystal Lies, which is not what it's going to be, but there are lies and people lie and characters lie in this book, and it's just a whole mess of everything. So I think that was pretty cool too when I realized that, and I was like, oh, I actually realized all that when I was on vacation at the cruise, and I was talking with my sister about my book, and I was trying to brainstorm title ideas, and I was bouncing stuff back off her and trying to get her input, and then I was like, oh, I got it, Crystallize, and she's like, that's really good. And at first I wasn't sure about it, but the more I kept thinking about it, the more I really like that title. So this book could possibly be called Crystallize. So right now that's the working title. It's not the finalized title, but it's a title that is in the strong running to be the final title. So let me tell you a little bit about this book. Unlike this book and the other books I already published, I don't have a blurb written for what this book is about. So it'll be a little bit all over the place, but I trust you guys. So hopefully you can figure out what I'm trying to say. So much like the other books I published before, there are multiple point of views in this book. In my first series, or duology, that I wrote, there were 4 points of views, and in this one there's 3 points of views. I really like writing multiple points of views, because then you can kind of get into the brains of different characters, and if different characters are in a couple places at once, then you can kind of see what's going on in each of those places instead of having that character just come back and explain to the others. And also then I can delve more into the internal conflict of the characters and see what they're really feeling inside. And when I write from a character's point of view, I really get to know that character a whole lot more. So the 3 characters' names are Lycia, Malachi, and Delena. This is actually not my first iteration of Project Crystal, or Crystallize as I've now have been calling it. I actually started out with a whole different setting, a whole different story, whole different characters, with only one main character that I named Annalie. And that book is not really anything like this book, except for a couple different things. The big plot twist, well, there's a couple different plot twists in this book, but this one big one that I can't really say much about, because maybe one day you'll be reading it, was in that book, and also the magic system was in that book. So the magic system in this world is really cool. So basically there's different crystals, kind of like in our world how people would get different crystals, and I started thinking about how people sometimes think that these crystals in our world can give them magic powers. It can be they can put spells on people with them, and I'm not really involved in that community, so I kind of took that and I kind of twisted it into a fantasy world where these crystals actually give magic powers to people. So there's 12 different crystals, maybe 15. I think there was originally 12, but I might have made 15, but obviously not all 15 have big parts in the story. But different ones, for example, amethyst gives people visions of the future or the past. It depends on how their powers work. Like rose quartz, people have empath abilities. There's sapphire, which people have ice manipulation. Rubies is pyrokinesis. So just a whole bunch of different things like that. So at the beginning of the book, I want to have a list of all of the different crystals and then what power they correlate to and everything like that. So then people can flip to it and not be so confused. So basically with the 3 different characters, the first one that I started writing from, oh wait, sorry, I was talking about the different projects. So that was the first one that I started writing with the girl named Annalie, and she had a whole bunch of different siblings. She didn't know about the crystals because her parents kind of kept her trapped in the house. It was a whole other different thing, but then she escapes, goes into the world, finds out people have crystals with powers, blah, blah, blah. But I kind of fell off that one, and I didn't really keep it. But then I started another project, which was the second iteration of Project Crystal. There was still Annalie, but then there were a couple other different characters. I think there were twins, Alex and someone else. I don't know what the other person's name was. And then there was another character, I forget her name, but she basically evolved into the character Lycia in this story. So there were 4 main characters in that one, but Annalie was still the main character, which she's not even in my current story. Sorry, Annalie! But she still lived in a house with her parents, and they kept her locked away from the rest of the world and everything, on this mountain. And then the one girl who, I don't even remember her name, but basically is Lycia in this book. She had a vision because she had the amethyst crystal, and they had to go and get Annalie and, like, go on adventures. I can't say much because the big plot twist in this book happened earlier on in these other books, and that is why I can't really tell you much about it. So, that one was my second iteration. Then I had a third iteration of this, because I still really liked the crystals, the magic system, and everything, and I was starting to like the world more, and I was starting to cement it more. So the next book is the most similar to my story now. So there was Lycia and there's Malachi. There was still Annalie, and then there was someone named Cypress, who basically kind of is like Delena, but very different. So Lycia, the first and second chapters are very similar to that book. I basically copied and pasted it and changed a couple different things. But yeah, and then there's those 2 characters, Annalie and Cypress, which I got rid of, and instead in this project I added in a girl named Delena. So that was a whole lot, and I realized that my descriptions of the other projects are confusing, but just know that this is the 4th iteration of this story, and this is the one that stuck with me. And I feel like this is a story that I've been wanting to tell and that has been inside me. Like, this whole magic system was so cool. I loved that idea. I just needed to find the plot, and I needed to, find the characters that would go with it, and I finally did. And it is great. I love it. So basically, there's a girl named Lycia. Her family, in this world, not everyone has a connection to a crystal, which the people who do have connections to crystals and have magic powers are called crystal casters. So basically, when they're around 13, could be a little younger, could be a little older, they start getting called to a crystal, and they go to a crystallarium, which is this big kind of like building, cave-esque thing with a whole bunch of crystals, and they get drawn to the one that fits them. And then that goes on a necklace, and then they have that power. So Lycia's family has not had a crystal caster in their family lineage for so long. So finally, Lycia, she has a crystal connection, and she is connected to amethyst, which gives her visions. So before the story even starts, she has a vision that ends up saving one of the counselors. And the counselors are, there's one that represents every crystal, and they basically run the world. So they're like the government and everything. So since her vision saved one of the counselors, she gets invited to come and go to this like exclusive school called Eloist Academy, where she can train with her powers, which is something she hasn't been able to do before, since she's just lived in a small village that didn't really have a lot of schooling or a lot of training or anything. So at the beginning of the book, she goes down there, and then she meets Malachi. And Malachi is the son of one of the counselors. actually the counselor of malachite, which is a type of jewel, which I chose his name before I figured out that that was a type of crystal, and I was like, that would be so funny if his dad was like, I really want you to be a malachite crystal caster, so I'm gonna name you Malachi, because his dad is the counselor for malachite. And the malachite crystal casters have shape-shifting abilities, which I always thought that shape-shifting is really cool. There's a character in the book I wrote with my friends who can shape-shift, and I wanted to explore that more in one of my own books. So, Lycia's vision ended up saving Malachi's whole family, including his dad, which was the counselor. So his dad is sponsoring her and letting her stay with them as she goes to Eloist Academy. So she gets there and then they meet. And then there's also another character. Her name is Delena. And this is where my favorite character comes in. I really love Delena just because their internal conflict is so complicated and so cool. So there's these people called the Reverie, and they are the crystal-less. They don't have a connection to any of the crystals. They aren't crystal casters, and because of that, they aren't treated as well as the people who are crystal casters. They can't have as many jobs. They basically have to like work more of the menial labor jobs. So someone starts to create this like organization called the Reverie, and they want to take down the council. They want to take down the crystal casters. So Delena, her parents are killed basically because they had to work like menial labor tasks in the mines, and then they died because of that. So she ends up joining the Reverie, and she hates crystal casters. And you know how most people figure out if they're a crystal caster or not around their 13th birthday? Well, her crystal casting ability comes later. She is 17 years old, and she has been working for about a year for the Reverie, trying to take down all the crystal casters, when all of a sudden she finds out she's a crystal caster herself. And oh my gosh, it is like so cool to see her struggle internally, because part of the Reverie's whole thing is their like deity in this world is called the goddess, and then basically the person who relates to like the devil is the sorceress. So the Reverie believes that all crystal casters' powers come from the sorceress, and they're evil and everything. And now this girl who believed all that, she's a crystal caster. She's in an organization who hates crystal casters. So she thinks she's going to get kicked out. She's so worried. She's so nervous. But basically she was dating someone named Kyrus, and he is the son of the person who's in charge of the Reverie. And he goes to the person who's in charge of the Reverie, his mom, and they come up with a plan for her to go undercover at Eloist Academy and try to take down the crystal casters from the inside. So that is the premise. They all are at Eloist Academy now, and a whole bunch of chaos ensues. And it is so cool, and I really love, with this magic system in this world, it's very, very soft. There's just people with fire powers, people with water powers. You have to kind of work harder to get better at your powers. Then there's power drain chains that can hinder your powers and make it so you can't use them, basically. But in this world, I really delved into everything, and I really thought about how each power would each power would help either make their world better, make it harder, different things like that. For example, the people who are empaths, I just like left a note in there that there's this one guy, he's an empath. He's not really in the story much, but he's training to be a therapist because he can read emotions and he's good at that. So it's kind of cool to see how their powers can help with different jobs, such as like the people who are weather manipulators. They help on the farms and everything, and they help grow crops. And I think that's really cool that I can delve into all that in here. And also, like, in their, like, different classes, like their science class, I talked about how their powers and, like, how telekinesis, like, lifting objects off the ground, it doesn't, like, make gravity non-existent. They have to put on another force with their mind to oppose the force of gravity and lift that object up. So it's a whole lot of training. Or with the shapeshifters, like Malachi's a shapeshifter, he has to study every single, like, the anatomy, all these different parts of a different animal before he can shift into that animal. And it's easier to shift into mammals because their anatomy is closer to human beings than it is to shift into, like, a lizard or something. So it's really cool to think about all these things, especially since I want to go into engineering and I really do like physics and science and different things like that and math. So it's kind of cool to think about how the science of their world works, even though there is magic in it. And it's not like it's a science fiction story or anything. It's still very much fantasy. But I wanted to add in a little bit of like science to their fantasy. So yeah, I've been having such a fun time with this. Actually, in this fourth iteration, I wrote it for a while in my junior year, I think. The end of my junior year, maybe. And then I kind of got stuck, and I took a break for a while. And then I came back to it over the summer. I had to reread all of it, and what better time to reread all of it than when my family was driving to go on the cruise, because we had like 7 hours. So I didn't have my actual computer or anything, so I used my phone, because I had my Google Docs on my phone, and I scrolled through and I read it. And I made little notes in a notebook, and then I went through and I started deleting chapters because the last few chapters went in a different direction. And I was like, I was so stuck when it went in that direction, but I had another idea. So it's always hard to kind of go back and delete some of your work, but I didn't delete it fully. I just put in those chapters on another Google Doc and deleted them from the main Google Doc. But you have to do that sometimes, and it's just part of being an author. So then I started writing, and I had so many ideas, and I started writing on my phone, which is really hard to write a story on your phone. But again, I didn't have my computer because I was on vacation, and I ended up writing around 7,000 words total from the whole vacation. And the past few days I've been writing a lot too. I started keeping track of my words each day. So for example, today is August 10th when I'm filming this. August 6th, I wrote 4,199 words. August 7th, I wrote 1,751 words. August 8th, I wrote 4,431 words. August 9th, I wrote 2,424 words. And today I haven't written as much, but I've written 578 words. And one thing that I've been trying to do with this story is, a lot of the time when I was working on other projects that I didn't get published or anything, I would make myself like come up with something. I'm like, you gotta come up with something, you gotta go. Especially since I would normally write them during NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, where people try to write a novel in a month. And that is a lot of pressure, especially since I felt like I had to write it, I had to keep going. But for now, even though I have been writing so many words a day, I've been trying to take a break, think about my book first, come up with ideas before going back to it. So some days I might write more, some days I might write less, whatever I have time for and whatever I have the ideas for. I really like to roller skate while listening to like music that sounds like it would come out of fantasy novels. So one time, I think it was actually the day of my birthday, I was writing and then I didn't know what to do next. So I literally laced up my roller skates, put in my earbuds, and skated around the block as all I did was think about my book. And it was so fun. And then I came up with so many ideas and I got to go back and write them. So this new way of writing has been really, really helpful to me. Even though sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to write, but I don't know what to write next. And then I can't write because I don't know what to do next. But it's been a really fun journey. I'd say I am not a planner, so I did not plan all this out, which is also why I had to delete some of the chapters. But I do have a couple like ideas floating around in my mind about how it will end and everything. And that means also that I might have to go back and delete some different things if it doesn't end up working out. So I can't get too attached to my writing, and I can't go back and overly edit, like line edit it before I go and finish the story and everything. But it has been so fun, and even if I do have to delete some things, that's okay. I also have been going through, and I have 3-act story structure, which is basically what most books are used. Most books' story structure is. So there's 3 acts. It's broken down into different things, and I really like to use the 27 outline. So basically, there's 27 different parts. And since there's so many different characters, there are different parts for each of them. Malachi's and Lycia overlaps, but since Selena's kind of like on a different team than them, hers doesn't really overlap as much. So I have A, B, and C for each of the 27 parts. And once I get to a different part, I write down just a quick sentence of what that is. So then I basically have a whole outline of my book by the end, but I didn't outline beforehand. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that's confusing or what, but that's just how I do it. And right now, I'm basically in the first part of the 3rd act. So I'm getting towards the end, which is so exciting, but I'm not quite there yet. Right now, I have 185 pages on Google Docs and 52,340 words. My projected word count is is that it will probably be around 70,000 words by the time I finish the draft. But then when I go back, I might have to take out some things, add some things in, do different like scene like major edits from that. So I still think around the end it will probably be around 70,000 words, but who knows at this point? Maybe it'll be a little less, maybe it'll be a little more. But 50,000 words is a novel, so I've already reached the novel word count, which is cool. Because these two books, I actually don't remember if this one was a novel or not. I think it was right under it. But this one was more of a novella because it did not hit 50,000 words. This one did hit 50,000 words, though. It's the first novel I wrote with my friends, so this one will be the first novel I wrote by myself, which is so fun. And yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm going to go to college soon, August 24th, so I probably won't have as much time to write there, but who knows, at the end of a long day, I might be like, I just need to get in some writing and open my computer and start writing it all up. But I assume that I will finish this first this first draft, even though it feels like it's like not my first draft, but the first draft of this version in probably by next summer, but who knows for certain. I'm just, that is my goal. I know I can probably finish it beforehand, but I don't want to force myself like I keep saying. So that's my goal. And then once I do that, I'll do an edit by myself. And then I probably will need some beta readers. And that's where it's exciting for you guys. If you guys, I know you're all readers, if you guys would be interested in being my beta readers, I probably will do a video by the time I'm done my first edit to have you guys as beta readers. And if you don't know what beta readers are, it's basically people who they read over the book and then they tell if there's any plot holes, they kind of talk through their thoughts. Do they think that, do they like all the characters? Do they like these things? Do they like the plot? Different things like that. How do they feel? And it's basically like, if you're reading a book, you basically can critique my book, especially since it's not published, and then I will need a couple people for that. So I'm hoping some of my friends who are also authors will be able to do that. My sister will be one, but then I might need a couple others, depending on how many beta readers that I know I have. And then I might have you guys fill out a little form if you're interested, and then you could possibly help read my work and help me get it polished up for publishing. So, hopefully you guys are excited for that, and you might want to participate in that, especially if you think that the concept of my story sounds interesting. So, basically that's all I have for now, I think. Yeah, but I did tell you guys that I'd be reading the first chapter of this book, as well as the first chapter of Elements. So I think I'm going to start with the first chapter of Elements. If you missed the last video, this is on Amazon if you want to buy it for yourself. It is obviously, it is good. It is middle grade. I think it's good. But my writing has improved so much since then. So I'll read this and then I'll read the first chapter of this so you can see just how much it improved. But also these are meant for different age ranges. This one was written as middle grade, while Crystallized is written as young adults. So that could also kind of factor into the different writing styles and everything, but also just because my writing style has improved so much. But I still think this is good, and it's actually surprising seeing as I first wrote it when I was in 7th grade, and then I edited it myself when I was in 8th grade, and then I have my mom edit it, and yeah. So basically, middle school me wrote this, and I did not know I was this good of a writer then. Not trying to be like, wow, I'm amazing. Obviously, there are issues with this. Obviously, it could be improved if I wrote this now, but it's pretty good. So let's get into it. Okay. Chapter 1. Ash. So Ash is the person telling this chapter. I took a tattered book off a wooden shelf and clutched it tightly to my chest. The soft brown leather encompassed me into a warm hug. I pulled away, tracing the intricate symbol that was neatly stitched onto the cover. The symbol showed water and fire interlocking together, weaving this way and that, united. This was something that I wished could happen in real life. Tears seeped from the corners of my eyes, blurring my vision until they fell out, rolling down my cheeks. This book was the last object I had left for my parents. It was a painful reminder of what happened last year. My hand shook as I slowly flipped open the book, revealing a picture of my family, which included me, my mom, my dad, and my twin sister, River. We were 2 fire elementals and 2 water elementals with the curse of a war. I still couldn't let it go. River crept up behind me. She laid a comforting hand on my shoulder. I know you miss them, Ash. I do too, she whispered gently. I nodded, not having enough energy to muster any words. Even though my parents had been dead for exactly a year, it felt like it happened yesterday, and the salty, burning sensation of losing a loved one was just as strong. My vivid, horrific memories wouldn't leave my mind. They were like an ever-burning flame, impossible to put out, impossible to get rid of. The Great Elemental War ruined my life. In fact, there's something great about the war at all. The wars between the fire and water elementals. I know it seems like they're sworn enemies since they're the complete opposite of each other, but sometimes that just isn't true. Take my mom and my dad, for example. My dad was a fire elemental and my mom was a water elemental. Even with all the rules in place, nothing could stop them from falling in love. Even though they could have been caught and killed for merely talking to each other, they still sacrificed their lives for love. Every Friday, they would sneak into the forbidden forest that divides Wateronia and Fireka. They met in the center, which was a little clearing between the trees. A few months after meeting each other, they had a secret wedding, inviting no one. Soon after that, we came along. I was born a fire elemental, and River was a water elemental. The night I was born, I came home to Fireka with my dad, and River went to Wateronia with our mom. I adapted to my life just fine, except for one small detail. No one could know about my mom and sister. I had to pretend that my mom had died fighting against the water elementals in the war, and that I never had a sister in the first place. Nothing is harder than convincing your friends, teachers, and pretty much everybody else you know that your living mom is dead. Every day, I knew that I had at least one thing to look forward to. Friday. Friday was my only escape from this life of lies. On Friday nights, my dad and I would head to the center of the Forbidden Forest to see the other half of our family once again before another week flew by. Our tradition carried out for years and years until one day I completely blew it. It was Mother's Day. Firefly, my best friend at the time, awkwardly invited me over to her house to make Mother's Day presents. It wasn't like she didn't want me to come, but I could see her face twist up strangely when I told her I could make it. If only she knew the truth. On the day before Mother's Day, I walked over to Firefly's house. My scarlet red hair was pulled up into a messy ponytail. I trotted up to her doorway and pressed the bell. A loud ding-dong echoed across the steps. A few seconds later, a middle-aged man with brick red hair opened the door. I recognized him as Firefly's dad. "You must be here for Firefly." A toothy smile spread across his face, uncovering dimples. I nodded. "Firefly!" he yelled loudly up the stairs. "Coming!" a voice shouted back. A chorus of pattering feet filled my ears as Firefly rushed down the stairs, with Ruby and Topaz on her heels. "Oh, hi, Ash," she announced awkwardly, clasping her hands behind her back. "We just started making lockets for our moms upstairs." I followed her as she walked up the stairs and took a spot at the wooden table. A pile of beads and silver chains were piled on the middle of the table. I grabbed a fistful of beads and got to work. We strung them across the chains, placing a heart locket charm in the center. "I can't wait to give this to my mom," Ruby exclaimed giddily as she added the last finishing touches to her locket. Hers was beautiful, complete with ruby red roses and a golden ribbon weaving around them. Ruby was a natural. "Me too," Topaz announced, grinning. Firefly looked over at me sympathetically. "Maybe you can place yours next to your mom's grave. She can look at it from up above." This is it, I thought angrily. I was done lying to my best friend. I just couldn't pretend that my amazing mom was dead anymore. That lie had bubbled up inside me for 11 years, and I needed to tell someone before it spilled out for all the world to hear. I wanted to tell Firefly that I was going to hand over my gift to my mother tonight, with the moonlight glimmering over top of us and a soft breeze blowing through the pine trees. I would hand her the locket with the picture of her and I holding hands inside, and she would smile, lighting up all the world. In my mind, everything would go perfectly, just as planned. I wanted someone to know all about my mom, how I looked up to her, how she did her own thing and didn't care what anyone else thought, how she was the most amazing elemental I ever met. And what better person to tell than Firefly? So I told her. I pulled her away from the others into another room. This way only she could hear. I told Firefly everything. I told her every single detail since the day I was born up until the details of our meetup last week. I never expected her to tell Queen Laviana, the queen of the fire elementals. I never expected her to betray me. She was my best friend since I was 3. We would tell each other almost every one of our secrets, and the other would never tell a soul. I guess this secret was just too big for her to keep to herself. Sure enough, when my dad and I traveled into the forest, the Queen's soldiers were waiting for us in the exact same alcove we met at every Friday night. The realization flooded over me, drowning me in fear. My heart beat faster and faster as the soldiers surrounded us, the Queen in tow. River and my mom broke through the brush right after us. I tried to wave them back, but it was too late. They were spotted. Two soldiers broke away from the circle, each grabbing one of them roughly by the collar of their shirts. They were tossed next to us like nothing but dirt. Queen Laviana stared at my dad. Her beady red eyes were smoldering like burning coals in the silvered moonlight. A smirk spread across her face. She shook her head sadly as if she felt sorry for us, but let me tell you, she was not sorry she found us. Aiden, you had the perfect life. You were the royal inventor. You were practically third in command, coming right after King Ignatius and I, of course. You were one of my closest friends from a youthful age. I trusted you, only to find out that you went rogue, she said intimidatingly. My dad flinched. Queen Laviana laughed. This was not a someone just said something funny laugh, but a cold, harsh, evil laugh. I had never seen the side of Queen Laviana before. At ceremonies and speeches, she seemed like a kind, caring, giving queen. Now I know what she is truly like. Who could have thought that a fire elemental could be so cold? Please, my dad pleaded, getting down on his knees. I love Coral with all my heart. I love Ashen River with all my heart. I never meant to do anything to betray you, but I couldn't betray my heart either. My mom crawled over to me, squeezing my hand tightly. Fear reflected out of her ocean blue eyes. I quickly pressed the locket I had made for her into her hand while whispering, I love you. Not as much as I love you. She clasped the locket around her neck. Then she pulled River and I into a tight hug, her soft pale skin brushing against mine. I looked over at my dad, who was kneeling on the grassy ground. Please, take me. Just let my family go. Dad, no, I shouted, my lips trembling. This is my fault. I need to be the one to go. I tried to break free from my mom's grasp, but she held me back. How can this be your fault? My mom asked, while soothingly running her fingers through my tangled red hair. It is my fault. It's my fault more than you could ever imagine. Tears leaked down my face, their bitterness overwhelming me. I never imagined this year's Mother's Day would go like this. Why don't I solve your argument for you? A sly smile danced across the queen's face. I'll take you all. She turned her focus to the guards. You know the drill. The guards gave her a swift nod before pulling out chains. They weren't ordinary chains. They were power-draining chains. These chains were a special type of chain that kept elementals from using their powers when they were wrapped around them. But that's not all. If these chains were even near you and you used your powers, you would get so weak that you would die. Only a few have ever survived something like that, and those elementals barely survived. Yes, power-draining chains were basically death chains. Their guards were coming closer and closer. I threw my hands in front of my face. It was the only thing I could think of doing. We were going to die. We were going to die. I peeked out from behind my hands. The guards were still coming until, BAM! The chains froze to ice before cracking and breaking into millions of pieces. I looked around confused. What was going on? Then I realized. My mom collapsed on the ground among the metal pieces of broken chains, a glimmer of frost at her fingertips. No, I whispered, the word echoing off my heart. Run, my mom cried hoarsely. I'll always love you. Those were her last words before she slumped to the ground in a heap, never to get up again. My dad ran over to her, howling in agony, not noticing the guards were coming back with new power-draining chains. The guards wrapped the new chains around him, layering on generous amounts, not risking it this time. I just stood there frozen, not able to move, not able to scream, not able to do anything. River ran to me, tugging my arm nervously. We have to go! The soldiers were done wrapping up my dad and had now turned towards us. When I wouldn't budge, River shouted, We can't let Mom die in vain! Her sharp words snapped me back to reality. I took her hand and ran. We ran and ran and ran, as far as we could, not daring to look back, too afraid of what we would see. But as we escaped, I could hear Queen Laviana's voice. I will never forget the words I heard her say. You should have never told your friend Firefly, little Ash. You brought this on your family. Although we escaped from Queen Laviana that day, I could never quite escape my guilt. Her words echoed through my heart, again and again. You should have never told your friend Firefly, little Ash. You brought this on your family. And that's the end of chapter 1! So obviously, like, there are things that can be improved, but there are a lot of things that were good. I really set up Ash's internal conflict, but I feel like I could have done a whole lot more with that through this book, but sadly I didn't. But I still think it was really good, and if that interested you, you can buy this on Amazon right now! And obviously there are some things that I was like, oh, I could have said that better, but some things were really good. I forget where was the sentence, but I was like, that is so good. This is my favorite line of the whole first chapter. Her beady red eyes were smoldering like burning coals in the silvered moonlight. Like, that's so good! I didn't know I wrote that good back then. But now you're about to see my new work and see if you like it. I hope you do. I think it's better than this, but I think this was still really good. And there were a couple things that I was like, oh, I could have done that better, but it was kind of more in a middle grade way. Like when I was describing Queen Laviana's laugh, and I was like, and not like she just heard something funny. It was kind of like, not like I would write right now, but I felt like it was good for that genre. Not genre, that age range, like middle grade. Like in the next chapter, too, like Lily is the person telling it, and she's not as serious as like I would have been nowadays writing about her home literally getting burned down. But then again, like this is middle grade, so obviously it's not going to be as like serious as young adult is. And she even like makes jokes during it and everything. But I think it's pretty good. And I think if you have a reader in your life that's around this age, I feel like you should get it for them, you know? It's also, I don't know how expensive it is because Amazon has to keep raising their prices, but when I first published it, it wasn't that expensive at all, so it's kind of cheaper than normal books since it is a novella. It is, let's see, how many pages? It is 185 pages for the first book, and for the second book, it is, let's see, 260 pages. So you can even see in this like amount of time that I got better. I can't read the first chapter from this because obviously that was spoiled the first one, but yeah, I think my writing got better in this one. Then this writing was paired with my friends, but I think it got better with Saren and my main character there. But now it is time for you to meet Lycia, one of my new characters. Sorry about the computer, but it has to be here so I can read it, since obviously I don't have an actual copy of the book to read it to you from yet. But here we go. Chapter 1, Lycia. Oh wait, I should compare the first lines, because I feel like first lines are a lot. So first, before I read it, the first line in this one was, I took a tattered book off a wooden shelf and clutched it tightly to my chest. And the first line is this, today was the day everything would change. The thought chilled me as if a glass of ice-cold water spilled out over my body. I should feel happy, excited. After all, I had been working towards this moment my entire life. But somehow, those emotions of elation never appeared. Instead, a sort of emptiness settled inside my chest. My mother smiled at me as I slowly walked into our small, cluttered living room with the bag of my belongings slung over my arm. My eyes flickered away from her happy face to the old wooden floor as I forced a smile onto my face. She held out her arms and embraced me. I am so proud of you, Lycia, she whispered as she ran her hands through my wavy hair. A melancholic feeling filled my heart. This would be the last moment in my mother's arms before I left for an undetermined amount of time to the capital. As I pulled away from my mother's arms, she brushed a strand of my lavender hair out of my eyes and reached out to grab the amethyst on the end of the silver chain around my neck. She ran her thumb over its many faucets. You're the first person in our family lineage in over 100 years to be a crystal caster. I never even dreamed that you would possess such a power, let alone that you would get this far. Her eyes got a cloudy, far-off look. Oh, I can just imagine you in the capital, at Timbris Manor, protecting a counselor with your abilities, and attending the most prestigious school in Marsinia, and living out your dream. She beamed at me. I smiled back, but the smile didn't quite reach my eyes. Yes, I had worked hard for this, and I had risen above the rest of my poor fisherman family, but it didn't feel like I had really accomplished any of that. I didn't control my genetics, and I couldn't quite control my visions either, no matter how hard I tried. The only reason Counselor Raiko invited me to live at his house, Timbris Manor, and use my visions to protect him and his family was because I had a random, vivid vision. The vision foretold a terrorist attack on him and the other counselors by a mysterious organization known as the Reverie. After being met with skepticism, my vision ended up saving him and his entire family from a rudimentary bomb device that would have blown up his manor. As an act of gratitude towards me, he invited me to work for him as a seer and protect both him and his family. The Reverie had grown more restless in their tactics, and with the counselor election coming up, Counselor Raiko needed all the protection he could get. A part of me also believed that I was his charity case, a public relations stunt that would make the citizens of Marsinia view him as some sort of savior who lifted a poor girl and her family out of poverty. To be fair, the offer he gave me was extremely gracious. Boarding, meals, and my education at the prestigious Eloist Academy all paid for, as well as a sum of money sent back to my family every week I worked for him. Furthermore, I would be revered as the savior. But that wasn't me. I didn't try to have a vision of that, it just appeared. Unlike other amethyst crystal casters, I can't control when I have my visions, or even what I have them of. From what I've heard, most merely brush an object and focus on what vision that object is connected to. For me, they come on randomly, sometimes without me touching anything. My heart squeezed as a voice in my head whispered, "Fraud." And to tell the truth, I would have given up all the counselors' lives if would have been able to save just one, my younger brother. My expression shifted instantly as I thought of my brother Azar. At the young age of 15, he was lost forever. All because of me. "Lucia?" my mother asked me softly. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said way too quickly to be convincing. "I'm just realizing how much I'm going to miss you and Dad." "I'll miss you too. Counselor Rika will take good care of you. You'll write us letters though, right?" Her mouth pressed together into a thin smile. "Of course!" As I looked at my mother's face, I could finally see the sad undertones under her supportive outer shell. Within the span of under 6 months, my parents were losing both their children, even if this time their grief had to be under the guise of happiness. "When's Dad coming?" "We'll meet him at the Electro train port," my mother explained to me as the two of us began to walk out of our small cottage. My heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Electro train. It was a metal train that weaved throughout Marcinia on a series of interconnected metal beams suspended far above the ground. The trains whizzed through the tracks, propelled both by science and magic. This was an example of the sort of innovations that I loved about the council. That's what I wanted to do with my life. I had never ridden on an Electro train. There was only one Electro train port at our small village of Ondine, so there was no use using it unless I was traveling out of the village, which is something I had never done before today. Not to mention, it wasn't cheap either. My family wouldn't be able to scrounge up enough money for my trip if the council wasn't sponsoring my train ride. As my mother and I grew closer to the Electro train, the atmosphere began to change. The small shacks and cottages that dotted the area where I lived changed to multi-floor houses and tenant buildings. The rags that I normally saw people walking around in were replaced with business attire and nicer cotton cloth that wasn't falling apart at the seams. I suddenly felt self-conscious, even though I was wearing the nicest clothes I owned, a cream-colored sundress that fell flat to my knees and contrasted my brown skin. Earlier I had tied a dark lavender hair ribbon around the center, like a belt, to add a pop of color and complete the outfit. I pinned back half of my wavy lavender hair as well. I felt beautiful and confident until we got here. Everything about me paled in comparison to every other girl who sauntered through this part of town. I saw a trio of 3 girls, each with a different crystal, wearing beautiful, intricate dresses, laughing with each other as if they didn't have a care in the world. And once I got to the capital, I cringed at the thought of how severely underdressed I would be. Once we reached the Electro train port, I saw the familiar twinkling eyes and toothy grin of my father. His patched shirt and pants that he wore to work put him even more out of place than I was, but he didn't seem to care or even notice all of the judgmental stares he was attracting. I ran up to him and he squeezed me tightly. My mom joined in the family hug. I felt so safe within their embrace. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I struggled to hold them back, but soon they were streaming down my face without end. Soon all 3 of us were crying in each other's arms. I sniffled as I pulled away, and my dad put a strong, comforting hand on my shoulder. His dark brown eyes stared into mine. "You're going to be okay, Lucia." I nodded and tried to say, "I know," but the words wouldn't come out. "Alicia Fract?" a woman's voice behind me asked. I turned around to see a well-dressed woman in a navy blue business attire and sleek, shoulder-length black hair. She had a cold gaze, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. My eyes drifted to the crystal amulet she wore. I immediately identified it as a beautiful labradorite crystal with its shifting shades of blue, yellow, green, and orange. The crystal yielded the power of force field manipulation. I nodded. "I just go by Lucia." She didn't respond to that and simply said, "Come with me," before she began walking towards a flight of stairs with her heels clicking on the tiled floor. "Okay," I said, rushing after her to keep up with her long strides. When I reached the top of the stairs, I turned around to wave to my parents one last time. They waved back with huge grins. Their tears had all but dried up. My parents seemed so supportive, but behind their smiles, I could see a glimmer of truth. Their hearts were breaking in two, just like mine. A wave of uncertainty washed over me, but I didn't have time to stew on the feeling as I rushed after the woman, reaching the side of what had to be the Electro train. "Any luggage?" she asked me curtly. "Only this bag," I responded, hoping that she couldn't hear the tremor in my voice. My bag held only a few sets of clothes, toiletries, writing paper, and utensils to write to my family, and my most prized possession, a lyricin. I smiled as I remembered playing my instrument in my town's orchestra. Losing myself in the music and running my hands through the strings of my lyricin lit me up inside. The unassuming pewter curves and old yellowed strings of my instrument were passed down to me from my grandma. It didn't look like much, but the melody it played was just as beautiful as any other pristine version. Besides, it was worth more to me than any elegant version because of the history it went through to end up with me today. I try to think of myself a little like my lyricin. Even if I didn't look like much, I still have the potential to accomplish the same as anyone else. "Keep that with you and find the seat on this ticket." The woman handed me a piece of thick paper that was gilded in what looked like gold. The looping script had my name, destination, and seat number on it. I clutched it tightly in my hand, knowing this was my ticket to my new life. Everyone else around me seemed to have virtual versions of their tickets on their holotech devices. My family couldn't afford any holotech, but I had read extensively about them at the library. I loved soaking up the knowledge. That was something that also set me and my brother apart. "Once you get to the capital, there will be someone waiting for you," the woman explained to me. "Waiting for me?" I asked suddenly. "You mean you're not coming with me?" The woman shook her head no once. "My job is here as a representative that reports back to the council on the economy of Ondaline. You'll be traveling alone." Somehow, that made this whole experience even scarier. The doors to the Electro train slid open, and a crowd of people filtered on in perfect sync. I froze, my feet seeming to stick to the ground as I stumbled forwards. Everyone knew exactly where they were going, as if they had been through this motion a million times. I curved my shoulders in on myself to make myself smaller as the crowd filtered around me. A thought pierced my mind. Would I ever be able to find my way into their rhythm of life, or would I be stuck forever in a different beat? After everyone else had loaded on the train, I tentatively took a step onto the cool metal floor. I showed my ticket to the woman waiting by the door. She placed a thin metal sheet over the top of it to scan it before smiling and waving me on. The aisle looked so narrow, so long. It suddenly seemed as if everyone was staring at me, noticing exactly how much I don't belong with them. One step at a time, I took a deep breath. I tentatively walked down the aisle until I reached the number that was scrawled across my ticket, over top of a seat. The bus was thin, with only one seat on either side and large windows. I sat down on the plush seat and set my bag by my feet. Soon after I sat down, an announcement roared to life, as if the voice was speaking through the walls surrounding me, informing the passengers of the departure. I wondered how they managed to accomplish something like that. I ran my hand over the smooth metal panel next to me as visions of wires and crystal pieces infused with magic filled my brain. As soon as the voice finished talking, the train took off with a burst of energy. Exhilaration filled my body as the train exited the station and smoothly slid into the tracks in the air. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I peered out the window to see the many houses dotted below. Adrenaline rushed through my veins and my heart fluttered. I wondered if this was what it felt like to fly. The happiness didn't last long, as I thought of how I was leaving my world to enter a totally foreign one, but this one would be devoid of my family. How would I ever survive? As I stared at the landscape zooming by, I remembered my father's words. "You're going to be okay, Lucia." I wasn't sure if it was true, but I hoped with all my heart that he was right. The end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously, that's still just the first draft, so a lot could go into change it. I could make lines better with my line editing, but actually, it's kind of the second draft of that first chapter since I had that in my previous iteration of Project Crystal, and then when I copied it over, I went through and changed a couple things, and I added that to make that even better. So, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing the first chapter of my stories, both my stories, this one and then my current project, and I hope you enjoyed hearing all about my current projects. Oh yeah, I found one time when I was on Pinterest, I found a picture, and that picture kind of influenced the character of Lycia. I kind of based her off of this drawing. So I will put the drawing up here. I don't know who the drawing actually belonged to, but it is not my own, and I thought it was so beautiful, and I wanted to create a character that was somewhat based off of how that character looks. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, like I said before, and probably next video will be back to about books, but I'll do another video definitely about some of the books that I wrote when I was younger. Maybe that will be the next video because I want to do that before I go off to college, because then I won't have my books from when I was younger there. So maybe I'll go through all that and read you guys some of those. So anyway, see you next time. Bye!